UNRWA opens an investigation of Israel. The Biden administration expands the ferocity of its attacks against Israel, with Benny Gantz getting caught in the crosshairs during an unauthorized visit to Washington, D.C. this week. I'll have all of that and some thoughts about the new era that we're living in coming up on In Focus. This morning, we woke up to the news that UNRWA, the UN organization that's supposed to be in charge of giving humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians in Gaza, and Judea and Samaria, Jerusalem, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and beyond, is opening up an investigation of Israel. Julia Tuma, UNRWA's spokesperson, said that UNRWA is opening up an investigation because its peoples that are jailed in Israeli prisons are saying that they're being subjected to torture. All I can say to that is boo-hoo. Why did she come out with this statement this morning? Well, last night, IDF spokesman, Brigadier General Daniel Hagari, gave some startling new information about UNRWA employees. And I think that the information makes conclusively the point that I've been arguing for many weeks, which is that UNRWA is not a terror-adjacent organization. It is not aligned with Hamas. It is Hamas. There is literally no distinction between where UNRWA begins and Hamas ends. In his press briefing yesterday, Brigadier General, or actually he's a Rear Admiral, Daniel Hagari, brought a call between two Hamas operatives, one of whom, his name is Yusuf Zaidan Suleiman Hawadra, is a elementary school teacher at one of the UNRWA schools in Gaza. In the conversation, I'm just going to play you a short clip of it. Hawadra is talking to his friend about the fact that they kidnapped Israeli women and brought them back to Gaza. And they're laughing and exulting in the fact that they have kidnapped Israeli women. And it's not just that they kidnapped Israeli women as hostages. If you recall, a couple months ago, I think it was, I spoke with Islamic expert Dr. Moti Kedar, who was talking about how they view Israeli captives as property, as chattel, that they can do with whatever they want. This is how jihadists view non-Muslims who they take captive in war, in a jihad, in a holy war for Islamic imperialism. And they refer to the Israeli female captives as sabaya. And what Hagari explains is that sabaya is the term that the ISIS terrorists used to describe the Yazidi women that they took captive, that they systematically raped and enslaved and used as sex slaves. So they're calling our women, our daughters, sabaya. Okay? And I'm just going to play you a short clip.
أبو حسن
خالد معك كيف حالك؟
سلامات.
وين ايش اخبار؟ وين انت؟
وين السبايا والدنيا ودين عنا خليك نايم.
انت بالشارع نام في الدار شارع اسكت احنا عند السبايا هنا مسكت واحدة.
اسكت.
وين ايش اخبارك؟
الله حبيبي.
وين انت؟
والله روحنا اسكت.
ايش كيف الامور؟
انا كويس اسكت والله نار.
لقيت شيء؟
ايه؟
لقيت شيء؟
جبنا فرس يا حاج.
ايش جبت؟
خيل فرس.
جاب حصان؟
صار اصلا اصيل مش حصان كديش تبع القرعان.
انت مين جبتهم؟ مين ساعدوا؟ عم يروحوا يساعدوا؟ ايه كيف الامور؟
ممزح يا راجل كيف حالك؟
والله خسينا جوا.
لا يا راجل.
والله بعد جهاد والله مبلجينهم جمعتنا.
لا شفت مناظر؟
شفت طق طلوع العينين طخينهم.
كم واحد شفت؟
شفت 2
والله
شاب من عندنا من جامعتنا.
طيب كان صاحبتهم يا حبيبي.
I think anybody who has daughters, anybody who knows a woman, any woman who listens to that tape has to understand what we're dealing with here. And of course, it took the New York Times 2 months until late December to even acknowledge the massive scale of the sex crimes, and the UN Women has only acknowledged it officially yesterday. At any rate, leaving aside that fact, in his briefing, Hagari went on and said he gave the names of many, many other UNRWA employees, school teachers, social workers, school advisors who engaged in terrorism on October 7th, who participated in the slaughter, in the burning, in the rape, in the abduction of Israelis that day that led to the murder of 1,200 Israelis, the captivity of 246 Israelis, and the wounding of thousands more Israelis, the overrunning of over 50 Israeli communities, et cetera, et cetera. So he said in this briefing that 450 UNRWA employees were active terrorists, so were either involved on October 7th or have subsequently engaged in terrorism on behalf of Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the war in Gaza. So this is not terror aligned. This is not terror facilitating. This is a terrorist organization. It is funded by the nations of the world. Now it's been defunded by some of them, but it has to be shut down. If you're opposed to terrorism, then you have to want UNRWA to be shut down. And it's actually convenient in a way that UNRWA is saying, okay, now we're going to open an investigation against Israel, because it's just like, it's not even the cat protecting the cream. This is literally exactly what they're doing on college campuses all over the world, which is inverting reality and saying that Israel is committing genocide when we're defending against a genocidal enemy, which is a whole of a society enemy, that this is the mass participation of regular, uninvolved Gazans, right, civilians, in the invasion of Israel. It was led by Hamas, but thousands of Gazans participated in it, and thousands more continue to give succor support. And the first among those are the officials of UNRWA, which again is it's not adjacent to Hamas, it is Hamas. But they're opening up an investigation, and what are you going to do? People have to take sides. Unfortunately, it works out that the United States government has taken sides, and they're siding with Hamas. I don't think that you can look at the positions that are increasingly ferocious that the Biden administration officials, senior officials, are voicing against Israel, can be viewed as anything other than a push to force Israel to capitulate to Hamas and lose the war. Particularly, we see this with the focal point of Rafah, which we should have invaded months ago, and it's very annoying to most Israelis that we haven't even started the operation yet. But the Americans are coming down like a load of bricks, demanding that we defend Rafah. I mean, it's why? This is Hamas's last terror stronghold. But I just want to play you a little clip of one of our favorite on this show, Vice President Kamala Harris, and she's speaking at the, one second, I just want to get it in. The JNS had a good write-up of it. She was overlooking the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the site of Bloody Sunday attacks on civil rights activists in 1965 in Selma, Selma, Alabama. And she opened her speech marking the 50th anniversary of that violence by addressing Israel and Gaza. And this is amazing. Condoleezza Rice did something similar when she was, when in 2007, when she went full-on anti-Israel. She started comparing the Palestinians to the schoolgirls in Birmingham who were murdered by, I think it was the Ku Klux Klan in 1963, who went to school with her. There's no similarity whatsoever between segregation in the United States. It is an insult to Black Americans and to their history in the United States to try to make a comparison between them and the Palestinians, which as a society are organized around the concept of genocide, that they want to annihilate Israel, they want to wipe it off the map, and they wildly support the atrocities that their people, their elected representatives, the Hamas terrorist organization, led them in perpetrating on October 7th. Okay, so I can't imagine a bigger slur of American Blacks than to compare them to the Palestinians. But that's what Kamala Harris did, simply through the symbolic of her speech, where she was standing there at the Edmund Pettus Bridge and talking about the suffering of the Gazans. Let me just play you a clip.
Given the immense scale of suffering in Gaza, there must be an immediate ceasefire. For at least the next 6 weeks, which is what is currently on the table. This will get the hostages out and get a significant amount of aid in. This would allow us to build something more enduring, to ensure Israel is secure, and to respect the right of the Palestinian people to dignity, freedom, and self-determination.
Right. So what she's saying there is that she wants the Palestinians to win. Right. That's it. She's equating what happened to our people on October 7th, what continues to be perpetrated against the hostages in Gaza, and Hamas won't even let us know who's alive among them. That's why there is no ceasefire, because they won't give us a list of the hostages that are still alive. So how can you negotiate anything when you don't even know what you're talking about, right? But she's saying, oh, no, Israel has to lose. Oh, yes, and we want to give the Palestinians a state, in so many words. So it doesn't matter. 99 members of Knesset said that they opposed a unilateral governments outside of Israel unilaterally recognize Palestinian state. But I mean, just think about it. If Biden recognizes a Palestinian state, then ostensibly the Palestinians get to open an embassy in Washington, and the United States is going to open an embassy where? In Jerusalem for the Palestinians? It's crazy. Anyway, so what was interesting about all of this is that it's a real learning experience for the Israeli left. I'm not sure they're completely going to be able to pick it up, because they're so moved by their hatred of Netanyahu and their obsession with trying to oust him from power. And you see it all over the place. They've restarted their anti-government demonstrations. They found a new excuse with the ultra-Orthodox draft. Never mind that the same people that are calling for ultra-Orthodox Israelis to face mandatory drafts are the same ones who were saying that everybody should stop serving in the reserves back in August, just 6 weeks before the invasion, because they didn't like the government's judicial reform agenda. But the same people, without batting a lash, are now saying nobody's allowed not to shirk their service. But be that as it may, they're trying to oust the government from power, and synchronized with this new campaign here in Israel of the left to try to oust the government, to try to foment either new elections so that we can have a new government, as Ehud Barak said in a Twitter space on February 13th, that the former prime minister is ahead of the whole insurgency that Israel faced for 10 months before the October 7th invasion. So he was saying the Knesset needs to call new elections by the end of February, he said, and now now, in order for 90 days to pass, and we can have a new government by June so that it can work with Biden and build a Palestinian state, which nobody in Israel wants. But that's their plan. So they're desperate to force the government to collapse by, the next week or so that they can get their election, so that Biden can get his Palestinian state. So synchronized with this new push to force the government out of power, we're facing this new American escalating hostility against Israel and push for more humanitarian aid into Gaza. And this is why would Hamas make a hostage deal? This is what a left-wing general said on Channel 12 last night, Kira Island. He said, the Americans are now putting so much aid into Gaza, and it's uncoordinated at this point with Israel, that, the Hamas has absolutely no interest in cutting a deal with us, because they're completely supplied. They can fight forever thanks to the United States. And so there won't be a hostage deal. All of our hostages are going to die because of the U.S. saying that they want to get the hostages out, but they keep resupplying Hamas. So that America's effective support for Hamas against Israel today is sealing the fate of our hostages. And what's more, it's strengthening Netanyahu, because the Israeli public sees this, and the more open the American animosity towards the government is, the more Israelis rally around Netanyahu, because they realize that he's the only leader who's willing to withstand American pressure, to stand up to them, to defy them, and to continue to prosecute the war for our survival to victory, first and foremost in Rafah, but also beyond. And so here's Benny Gantz, and on cue he comes to Washington. And the idea that they were pushing in the anti-Netanyahu media here in Israel is that Gantz was going to be able to solve the problem with the Americans in a way that Netanyahu can't, because it isn't that Biden and Harris and all of their associates, Hadi Amar, Meir Bitan, Tar, and Robert Malley, and Tony Blinken, it's not that they're hostile to Israel, they're only hostile to Netanyahu. So they're going to be able to make a deal with Gantz. And he really got blindsided, because he comes to Washington, and I think on the plane to Washington, here's Kamala Harris likening Israel to the Ku Klux Klan, right, on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Alabama, right? So here she is completely maligning not Netanyahu, but the state of Israel. And he comes in thinking, well, all she hates is Netanyahu, and that's not what he found. And so he got, ambushed by her and by Brett McGurk, who's the official in the National Security Council who's in charge of Israel. And he's also he was one of the negotiators of the Iranian nuclear deal that transferred American support for Israel to Iran back in 2014, 2015. And he met with these Democrats on Capitol Hill, and he met with all of these people, and they're all attacking Israel. Not Netanyahu, Israel. They want Hamas, they want a ceasefire. They want a ceasefire now, like Kamala Harris said. That's what they want. They want us to lose. And so he's dealing, he's like, oh my gosh, right? So he was totally blindsided and he was humiliated because he was supposed to save the day and he got nowhere because the sort of, before October 7th, the left could be forgiven for thinking that there was a lot of common ground. There's a lot of overlap between the administration's support for Iran and its proxies against Israel and their desire to oust Netanyahu. Because in times of calm, it seemed like, it was really just that you could make the argument that the administration was only advancing anti-Israel positions because they hated Netanyahu, that it wasn't anti-Israel, it was anti-Netanyahu. But when you see the administration saying, we want you to give up Mount Dov in the north, in the Golan Heights that controls the entire northern section of Israel, give it to Hezbollah to get a temporary ceasefire and don't go to war. And we're supposed to give up sovereign territory to Iran's Lebanese proxy in Lebanon that controls Lebanon is insane. But that's what they're trying to negotiate. They're trying to force a ceasefire in Gaza that will allow Hamas to continue to control Gaza and rebuild its forces very quickly because they'll remain in control of the international border with Egypt, fully resupplied, UNRWA fat and happy, even if the United States stops giving them money. And all of these things happening, the United States is siding with Iran's proxies in Lebanon and in Gaza against Israel. And so you can no longer make the argument that there's overlap, that there's so much shared ground between the anti-Netanyahu left and the anti-Israel Americans, because there isn't, because it doesn't work anymore. So they totally humiliated Gantz, and I don't know what conclusions they're going to reach, but it certainly, at the end of the day, backfired, and I think it's going to increase public support for Netanyahu, this whole thing, and certainly it's going to increase the likelihood that Israel will move very quickly to finally operate in Rafiah because the Americans are so over the top. Now, why are they so over the top? They're so over the top for two reasons. One is because they've been convinced that, their foot soldiers are all progressives and Islamists, and they need to show how anti-Israel they are in order to maintain their base, in order to keep their base happy. But of course, their base isn't really, it's not even the majority of Democrats. And so it's crazy politically. I wrote about this both in JNS and also in the New York Post this past week and explaining that this makes no political sense. And really what they're doing is scapegoating Israel and the Jews for what may very likely be an electoral collapse in November. But at any rate, you can read the article. The larger point here is that the administration no longer wants to pay lip service to Israel because they fear that the bear hug that Biden gave Israel after October 7th is actually now ricocheting against it. Fareed Zakaria said it in his monologue this week on his television show that they should never have given us the bear hug to begin with. But these kinds of messages that are coming from senior Democratic operatives in the media like Fareed Zakaria and James Carville and others are telling the administration, which is already in a tailspin because they're behind in the polls in all the swing states, that what they need to do is ratchet up both their anti-Israel policies and their anti-Israel rhetoric. So in comes Benny Gantz thinking that he's going to get praise because he's not Netanyahu, and he gets instead, gets the carpet pulled out from under his feet, and he's humiliated. So that's what happened. And hopefully the Israeli left will learn the lessons and stop trying to overthrow the government in the middle of the war. But we'll have to see about that. And here I just want to turn very briefly to something else, which is that I think Biden said a few weeks ago, and I quoted it at length on this show, that he said that he had been speaking to Netanyahu, and Netanyahu said on the phone call, when they're talking about when Biden is demanding that Israel limit its operations in Gaza to protect all of these innocent civilians who, at best, you can say that they're victims of Hamas, and at worst, it's that they are Hamas, certainly UNRWA is. But so he's remonstrating Israel as per usual, hectoring us, saying, you have to stop, you have to limit your bombing, you have to limit your military operations. Yes, of course, we want you to win, but you're not allowed to actually take any measures that you need in order to win. And so Netanyahu, according to Biden, said, how can you talk to us this way after what you did with Dresden? And Biden responded to him, that's why we founded the UN and all these international organizations that are supposed to prevent this kind of carpet bombing that the United States and Britain carried out over Japan, over Germany during the course of World War II. And that's what they're there for. And I think it's it was a significant exchange, especially because of what we're seeing in Lebanon and what we're seeing in Gaza. And I'll talk about this probably at greater length, but I just want to throw out something that I've been thinking about. Look, Israel faces a genocidal foes that, like the Nazis towards the Jews in World War II during the Holocaust, simply want to kill all of us. We see their allies in the United States and in other Western countries that are calling for genocide of Israel from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free, accusing us of genocide, projecting the crimes of our foes onto Israel, onto Jews in the diaspora, and hounding people, harassing them out of the public square, whether it's Widener Library at Harvard or any other public space in MIT, at Columbia, Cornell, Berkeley, whatever, all of these places. So we see this push there. Obviously, here, what we saw on October 7th made very clear what we can expect from a Palestinian state if, God forbid, we're ever stupid enough or coerced by America or whomever to allow such a state to form in Judea and Samaria, which is a genocide. And it makes me really think about there's an argument between the Zionists and the American Jews after World War II about what is the proper response to the war. And the Zionists said Jewish statehood, Jewish power, we need to be able to protect ourselves. And the American Jews said international humanitarian law, and that's going to tie up everybody in so many different international humanitarian law knots that they're not going to be able to carry out genocide. Well, this isn't true, right? I mean, the Zionists have, I think the power people have won this argument conclusively, and they won it conclusively both on October 7th and every day since then. Because what we're saying is that the United States immediately came in and said, we expect Israel to abide by international humanitarian law, which then they make up from day to day in order to claim, right, that everything that Israel does is somehow or another a breach of international humanitarian law, when actually nothing that Israel does is a breach of international humanitarian law. And here's the main point that I want to make here. The UN, I think it's called, the UN Charter, stipulates that you can't take territory during the course of the war. You're not allowed to occupy territory or whatever. So this is the idea at heart, is that, there's no military solution, that everything is a problem that we can all come together and reach a meeting of the minds, and people will change their mind. You'll have denazification, you'll have de-Hirohitoization in Japan or whatever, and everything will be fine, and you'll make BMWs and Toyotas, and it'll be fantastic, right? But in what we're facing, you couldn't have done that without an unconditional surrender by Germany and Japan. You could never have gotten to the point where you could even talk about denazification if you hadn't first had unconditional surrender. And this international regime of the UN is it is sort of intended to prevent total annihilation by an aggressor, but what it actually does is it blocks victory by a defender. So it says you can't win, you can't seize territory that you need in order to prevent another genocidal assault on your people. You can't do anything, you can't seize territory in Lebanon in order to allow your people to come home to the border towns in northern Israel where they face a genocidal foe across the border fence. You can't actually do the things that you need to do in order to exist. And so therefore, at the end of the day, the UN and the UN system is reduced not to being a terror-adjacent system, but to actually being a terrorist system, to being a system that enables, that funds, that clothes, that feeds, that indoctrinates jihadists to carry out genocidal assaults like October 7th, and with an eye towards continuing them on till Israel is eradicated. And so we're facing sort of a pivot point, I would say, in the way that we look at war, in the way that we look at defending ourselves in war, in what it means to win a war. And here I'm just going to leave you with one thought, which is that at the end of the day, when you're facing an enemy that simply wants you to be annihilated and enslaved and humiliated, which is exactly what we're facing, not only with Hamas, but with Hezbollah, with Iran, and all of its proxies that we're now surrounded by. You can't try to find a diplomatic solution to the problem until you've achieved military victory. You can't actually talk about the day after, as the Biden administration has been hectoring Israel to do, until you deal with today. And today you have to fight. And today you have to, exactly what Prime Minister Netanyahu and the government said after October 7th, we actually have to eradicate the enemy. We have to annihilate Hamas and its regime. And absolutely everything that the Americans are dictating to Israel undermines that effort. So I don't know. I guess we're already in an open breach with the United States on this, as Benny Gantz experienced this week in Washington when he went there thinking that they were going to be his friend because he's the anti-Netanyahu, and only to discover that that's not the way Washington is flying these days with the Biden administration. And we're just going to have to weather this storm. And people who think about war and think about strategy and think about how to resolve conflicts have to recognize that the answers that were found with the architecture of the post-World War II international system don't work anymore for a number of reasons. And we can go into them later. But the main reason that I want to just focus on now is that they block Israel in this case, but also the United States in Iraq and in Afghanistan and in countless other struggles. They block you from doing what you need to do in order to actually survive. Israel cannot survive with a genocidal regime capable of continuing to attack it and with that enjoys international support. We can't survive. It'll just get worse. It'll just get worse and more dangerous. And in order to, it's quite possible that unless we really are brilliant, which I hope we are, I don't see how we can actually eradicate our enemy operating under these rules of the game that say no buffer zone in Gaza, no open immigration, not even forced, God forbid, but letting Gazans leave. You have to leave them all there so they can just stew in a sea of hatred. No taking over a security zone in South Lebanon when it's effectively today northern Israel is a security zone for Hezbollah, because no Israeli can safely live in the border communities when they have anti-tank missiles that nobody can intercept because they move too fast and too low. So those are my thoughts for today, and I'm going to have some really interesting guests coming up later this week and some further stories. So I'll talk to you later. Take care. Have a great day.